been getting a lot of questions about what colors I'm using, what specific colors are in my palette, and how do you even create your own color palette yourself, what colors to choose. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to set up your own unique personal color palette for success. So where do you actually start? And before you start buying all sorts of different color palettes without really knowing what to put inside, let's talk about the colors first, because then you can determine how much space do you actually need. And this is the palette that I'm currently using. This is filled with colors that I constantly use, and this is the first step to really figuring out what color should you put into your color palette. If you just started out, I would start with a standard watercolor set that usually brands provide, like Schminke, Daniel Smith, Van Gogh, Winsor Newton. They all have standard watercolor sets with colors you can start with. And then from there, you can figure out what colors do you use a lot. And it's exactly how I did. I started with a standard watercolor set with pans. And then I started observing my usage of all the colors. What colors did I keep reusing all the time? If I bought a new color and added to my set, did I actually use it in the end? And the more you observe, the more you know what colors you use, the more you actually know what colors are your go-to colors. So I can see this is a very messy watercolor set that I use. It has lots of different colors, but it follows a specific structure that we were going to talk about, so stay tuned for that. But you can clearly see it by the look of these holes. I hit the pen. It means I very heavily are using these colors. So first step was to observe what colors do you really use a lot. Just bring them all together, put everything on your table, and then let's dive in and talk about where do you start. So I would start with, for example, your yellows. I will start with a cool yellow, for example, a lemon yellow. I can use it to create greens. A cool yellow is like a very citrusy yellow. A warm yellow in this case would be, for example, a cadmium yellow. A cadmium yellow is more orangey, slightly more like a warmish compared to lemon yellow. And if you would like to learn more about what is cool and warm colors, what does it mean, and what do I need to know this? You need to know this for color mixing, because it determines if you get vibrant mixes or more neutral or muddy versions. And you can find a free guide to that in my description box down below, where I talk about cool and warm colors and about color mixing, how it affects. The link is in the description box down below, so go check it out. Let's talk about your reds. Next would be, for example, a warm red. And a warm red, for example, would be a cadmium red. Cadmium red is a very warm, traffic light type of red. And a cool red would be, for example, Kodachrome rose. Kodachrome rose is more like a pinkish, rosé color. And the way you can already see how I place it, I loosely follow a color wheel, meaning whenever I think about how I then would like to place my colors into my palette, I think about what would make sense for me, how will it be easier for me to navigate if I have random yellows here, I have a yellow here, and it just doesn't make sense for me to have it all over the place. So what I do is just immediately when you design your color palette with the colors, maybe it will be super helpful for you to also place it in a color wheel manner. So meaning you have a cool yellow, then it moves to a warm yellow, and the warm yellow moves into this orangey red now, and then we have a cooler red that then moves into the bluer color. So this is kind of like the color wheel that I'm kind of like mimicking here. So next would be a blue, and in this case it would be a warmish blue. A warmish blue that I use a lot is Ultramarine Finest, and Ultramarine Finest is is an ultramarine that is not super granulating, so I can mix it with my pinks to create a nice purple without having this separation of pigments in my wash. And then I'm looking at, okay, what other blue colors do I use a lot? And it was always, always in the standard set, it's usually also a cool color, so a cool blue. And it can be different in different sets. Sometimes you might use Prussian blue, maybe it's a phthalo blue. Just look for a cooler blue, because with this blue, you can mix greens, you can mix turquoise colors, and this is a great spot to start. And then you can add convenience colors to your color palette. Convenience colors are colors that you don't have to mix yourself. So for example, greens, oranges, any purples, maybe some earthy colors, because then you can just tweak them a little bit. If you have an orange, you can make it more yellow, more red. You don't have to mix green. You can just start with one green and then make it more yellowish or more bluish by adding either blue or yellow. And usually also in your standard set, you have two different ones. One is more bluish, one is more yellowish, or maybe just like something in the middle. In my case, I noticed that whenever I was painting, I constantly mixed a color all the time. And instead of just kind of not wasting, but just using too much of some certain colors, I had a pre-mixed color. So for example, a May green. A May green is a more warmish green because it's a more yellowish. It has more yellow in it. It's also very helpful to look at the pigments. So if you look at here, in this case, you can see that it says PY 151. This means it's a yellow pigment with this number. And then you also have green, a green pigment, number 7. So this means they used a green pigment and also a yellow pigment to make this May green. But I also have a cool green, and a cool green means that it has more blue in it. And again, if you want to learn more about the difference between warm and cool colors, in between in terms of your color wheel, and also when it comes to specific colors, check out my free guide to color mixing where I talk all about that. Now, the reason why I have a cooler green and a warmer green is because with this green, this is a phthalo green, and as you can see, this is a PG7. So this is this pigment that they used here in this May green. You can see here. They used the same green pigment, PG7, and then they just added a yellow to create May green. And you can have that as like your starting point and mix your own May green with another yellow. I use it for my turquoise color. So I use my cerulean blue, my cool blue, with my cool green to create beautiful turquoise colors. And it's just a very nice combination. You can also use other greens. Every brand has different names, but usually they just use the same pigment, but they have different names. Sometimes the company can manufacture the pigment or use process the pigment differently, but by checking the pigments you can clearly see what's inside. Just the name is different. And we follow a color wheel here. We move now to the greens, and if we close the color wheel, we go back to our yellow, and then we can create more yellow greens, or if you go this direction, we create more bluer greens, and here we have our purples and things like that. Now next, if you want, for example, if you notice that you mix orange a lot, because orange is not a color I use all the time, I usually mix it myself. So I just very late, like recently, I added an orange here. So an orange would be also a convenience color. And I place it right in between my warm yellow and my warm red, because I know these are colors that would create this color. And if you look at again the pigments, it says yellow pigment and a red pigment. For example, I have cadmium yellow. This is a Y35, and this cadmium by another completely different brand. They also use the same pigment, PY35, and a red pigment. Let's see what red this is, cadmium red. This is exactly PR108. Next, convenience color could be also purple. So if you notice that you use a purple all the time, you might want to place it somewhere here, for example. I use my Kodachrome Rose or any PV19 I might have if I run out of something. But I mix those together to create a purple. And depending if I have more pink or more Kodachrome Rose, the more reddish the purple is. If I have more blue in it, I have a more bluish purple. But if you want to have one purple that you then, use in a color mixing, so you don't have to mix it yourself, you want to have a starting point, you can totally add it here, for example. It could be either cooler or warmer purple or something in the middle. You can place it here. But what I also like to do is, if I notice that, for example, ultramarine doesn't fit or cerulean blue doesn't fit, and I start using another color to kind of like find the middle ground, this is where I created my middle blue. So middle blue for me would be cobalt blue light. Cobalt blue light is kind of like in the middle, and again, cobalt looks different, different brands. This is a non-granulating cobalt, and it's a nice blue color in between. It's not too red, it's not too green, so it's kind of like in the middle. And this is a color I would place in the middle. So again, we're kind of placing them how it makes sense to me, and how it might make sense for you where to place it. And from there, you have another blue color I use all the time, maybe a blue color to constantly mix. Like one color I constantly mix is something like this kind of like blue sky. I usually use my cerulean blue and mix white gouache to it, but I might actually add this celestial blue by White Nights. I bought it like months ago, and this is basically how this looks. And if you look at the pigments again, you see that they used PB153. What do we have here? PB153 and some white pigment in my cerulean blue, and they also added a little bit of white as well, PB6. So I might actually add it here, so in between this color. And then again, maybe you want to have variation in your greens. So I noticed that I really like using olive green and the yellowish version, and then you tweak it to more yellowish, to more greenish, maybe more earthy. So I started adding an olive green, and I then place it more towards the yellow side. And if I look at if I look at the pigments, it says PO62, so it means it's an orange pigment. So this is not it's not an orange pigment, but I could potentially just use cadmium orange and mix it with my greens, and it creates a similar olive green. But I also like to use Indian yellow, because Indian yellow is a color that I use all the time. I like to maybe just use that as a starting point. I like to use it with my greens. It's a transparent color, so look for colors that you can use in different scenarios. You can maybe layer them, you can mix them together, you can lift them. Maybe some specific colors are more opaque, some are less opaque. During your painting journey, during your watercolor journey, you will notice what colors you will use a lot, what not so much. Then maybe you realize, no, this color is way too opaque for me. Can I find an alternative? Don't feel like now you're stuck with colors because you put it into your color palette. You can always, if you notice I'm not really using it, or something changed, I really don't like it anymore, you can always just finish it and then put a new color into your well. Now you're moving on to more the earthy colors. if you look at your standard set, you might find some browns, some blacks, maybe even. And these are great colors to, you know, finish up your color palette. Earthy colors can be used to desaturate some of your vibrant colors. You can make something more natural, more subtle. You can make certain colors darker and just make them more a little bit less, you know, vibrant and so in the face. Raw sienna is a great base color for example, a warm white. So if you paint a wall or a building in general, and it's not just white, it's like lit by light, or it's just the facade, it's like this brown and it's warm brown or yellowish. Raw sienna can be very helpful with that, and you can mix earthy greens with that. Then for other instances, for example, burnt sienna is one of the colors I use all the time. I run out of tubes even. I use it to create grays with my, for example, cobalt blue light, because they create nice grays. You can make a bluish gray if you have more of the blue. You can have a more reddish gray, like a warmer gray, when you have more of the burnt sienna. And this is a great color also to just, again, neutralize some of your vibrant colors, make it into a more reddish version. And I also like to use burnt umber, because burnt umber is also a desaturated color. It's a more of a brownish greenish version. So I have, you can see this is still a yellow in my case, raw sienna. This is still red, sort of a reddish color, my burnt sienna. And burnt umber is also kind of like this greenish brown, also a little bit, that I can use to neutralize certain colors. And lastly, I also have, that I also recently added, is sepia brown. Sepia brown, you might have something similar. Maybe you only have maybe indigo, maybe you use more alpha indigo. Sepia is also like a brown, that, but now it has black in it, slightly blacked version. And sepia can look different again, also according to, like, depending on the brand. So some are a little bit more blackish, some are more brownish. So this is another option for you to make certain colors darker, more muted, and tweak your colors instead of just using black. Because if you use too much black, it just flattens your whole painting. It makes it just dull. And what I also like to use is different blue color. So I used to have indigo, and then I switched to Indantrain blue, and or also dark blue by Schminke. The pigment is PB60, and I like to use this for painting seascapes or to make my blue slightly darker. So I don't want, for example, if I want to darken a certain color like ultramarine, if it's the blue is not the dark blue that I want, I'm not often go with these browns because it might not work with what I'm working on. I go with a darker blue. I also have Naples yellow that I use all the time by Schminke. So I also like to have it in between my yellows. So you can see I might not have enough actually space for that. This is why it's good to have like an overview of all the colors that you might want to use. Now in the end, I decided to use my old palette and just clean it because it has enough space for all my colors, and I just like the size and it sparks joy when I hold it. So I just cleaned it, removed some of the stains with my magic eraser, and then refilled all the colors that I showed you in the video. So from lemon yellow to all the warm colors to the blues. I added my convenience color and some new colors in between my primaries and my secondaries. And I also replaced my blue by just putting a little bit of water on top to soften the pigment, and then I scraped it off and put it somewhere else so it's not wasted. And because I didn't have enough space for my sepia, I just used a full pan, an empty full pan, used hot glue to attach it, and then just filled in my sepia inside. And if you already have full pans, you can also just place them here. Around 4 can fit here, and you can basically fill everything if you want, but this is how it looks now. And if you fill your pans, make sure that you completely let everything dry. If you just fill your mixing palette and close the lid and just go travel, everything will just start moving around in your palette and it will just create a whole mess. So make sure everything's completely dry. Test it, check if it's soft, because here, for example, this is still soft, so it needs to dry maybe a few days even, until it's completely dry. So make sure everything is dry before you start moving it around. And there you have it. Make sure to download your free guide to watercolor mixing that you can find in the description box down below. And if you're completely new and you don't have your go-to colors yet and you're just starting out to figure out what colors you might need, make sure to download my free guide to watercolor painting, where I exactly talk about how to pick your right supplies from paints, paper, brushes, give you all the different options for your budget. You can also find a link in the description box down below. And if you want to learn more about color mixing and how to avoid muddy colors with your color set, make sure to check out the video right here. Thanks so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!